Hello friends, welcome into another video. I'm DustFood, and today I want to do something maybe a little different than I'm used to doing, and that is I want to show some real love and just abject positivity towards behavior, and specifically with Dead by Daylight, right? So again, as I am keen to point out, I tend to be pretty critical, but there is one thing about this game, right off the bat, that I think is kind of underappreciated. There is something that I do not think gets enough love. And while there are plenty of things to criticize, plenty of things to be angry about, this one, we're going positive. And I know that they say on YouTube, you go negative if you want views, but we're going to go positive here because we have some stuff to say. And the subject of today's video is I want to talk about killers who are in way better places than they used to be. Because that's not all of them. That is not every killer. There are plenty of killers who have stayed mostly static, and a few who I think in a separate video, they've gone worse. They've gotten worse since being released, and you probably know who they are if you've played the game, you know, for a considerable amount of time. But on the same vein, there are some very notable killers who have actually gotten a lot better since release, and I want to talk about those and go through and give specific examples, because what I'm not going to do here is I'm not going to be like, okay, well, I feel like they're better. We're going to go through and say, hey, who's gotten massive buffs? Who has been reworked and improved? And that's what we're going to do here. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. We're going to jump right in and start with number one, Trapper. Now, I realize, right, that Trapper is still not an S tier killer. He's not an A tier killer. He's not a B tier killer. Who, gosh, would you even say he's a C tier killer? Like, probably not. I wouldn't put him there. I don't think he's very good. However, if this Trapper is, let's say, D tier, old Trapper was F tier. Comfortably F tier. If I just go through some of the things, for a lot of these killers, I'm going to list what patch it was that really turned it around for them. But in the case of Trapper, there is not a specific patch I can point to and say this is when he got better. Because there are a lot of them. There are a lot of little changes that add up to make him a lot better than he is. So his trap disarm time is much longer than it used to be. It used to be, I believe, 1 second. Now it's 3 seconds. Traps can no longer be sabotaged. If you're new to the game, you may not know this, but if you had the perk Saboteur or a toolbox, you used to be able to break traps you found on the ground. And originally, you'd break them and they'd be gone for good. But then in a later patch, they changed it where, okay, after being gone for 3 minutes, they'll come back into the game and he can pick them up again, which wasn't ideal. So eventually behavior just kind of said, you know what, screw it. This is a stupid mechanic. We're going to move past this. And they got rid of sabotaging traps altogether. And I think it's been extremely beneficial for Trapper. It's hard for me to even imagine playing with that in place. These days, you know, back when I used to play, I didn't think anything of it, right? Like, it's like, yeah, no, of course you can break traps. It's just part of it. But now that you can't, it's like, wow, how did Trapper ever win a game back then? Another thing that's been changed is traps can now be reset without having to be picked up again, which is lovely because if you are at your trap limit and you come across a strong trap that's just been popped one way or the other, you can just set it again without having to pick it up, without having to go to put another trap down or anything like that. Again, just a really nice quality of life thing there. Also, another thing that killers hate is RNG. So they took the RNG out of it. Trapper used to have the RNG that would determine if he spawned with 4, 5, or 6 traps. Nowadays, that's gone. He will spawn with 6, the maximum number. So essentially, Trappers these days are getting the best possible RNG from the former system at all times, which I think that's nice. I'm sure Trapper players really appreciate that. Again, I don't really play a ton of Trapper, but that's got to be nice. I know there's still changes they want to see made, but all these are nice. And then I haven't even mentioned the best one, which is that trap setting speeds are way faster than they used to be. Go back, watch footage, you can find it, of base Trapper setting speeds from the early days of the game. It's almost comical because, again, it's one of those things I look at and I'm like, how are we okay with this? How did we not, I mean, how did anyone play this game at launch? These days it looks so broken. But yeah, I guess the last thing here for Trapper, I didn't see this, I'd written it down, but he also starts with more traps now. He, for the longest time, he started with 1 trap, now he starts with 2. So you look at Trapper, it's just this constant, okay, we're going to make him a little better here, and a little better here, and a little better here. And, you know, it's taken him from the point of being a terrible killer to maybe a bad killer, maybe a situational killer, but massive buffer Trapper, even if it took them, you know, years to kind of accumulate that one quote-unquote buff. Next up is one of Trapper's OG3 buddies with the Wraith. Now, you're not going to hear Hillbilly on this list. Hillbilly would be on the other list, right? If we did one where it was about killers who were a lot worse than they were originally, Hillbilly has definitely got him worse. But Wraith's got him way better. He has been nerfed and buffed kind of in a pattern since release. You know, they'll make this better and then they'll make this worse type of thing. But overall, he's a lot better than he used to be. So the big one for Wraith was patch 4.5.0, wherein the Wraith became completely invisible when he was 20 meters or further away from survivors. That is so huge for a stealth killer to not be able to be seen from 60 meters away. Like, I don't know. It's really crazy to me that that was ever in the game for a stealth killer, but I also understand that behavior's general approach to things, and this is one thing that sometimes it works for them and sometimes it comes back to bite them, but they tend to err on the side of caution when it comes to things, and not always. I know people can come up with examples like Medal of Man where they, or Circle of Healing, where they just really threw things out to see what would happen, but they tend to err on the side of caution, so maybe they thought that a completely invisible killer would be too much, but nowadays, if Wraith is not closer to you than 20 meters, you can't see him at all, and you can't hear him because he doesn't have a terror radius. The only thing you can really hear is that little rattling breath he has, and that's fine. That's a good giveaway that he's near. Would he be stronger without it? Yeah. Would he be too strong without it? Possibly, especially with his add-ons like the Coxcomb Clapper, which makes it completely silent when he uncloaks. And as I mentioned, he's received a lot of kind of little nerfs and buffs over the years, so I'm not going to get into each one of those because, frankly, you can go and you can look at the change logs yourself, and you can determine how meaningful each one of those was. But right now, Wraith is way better than he used to be, mainly because he's invisible from a distance, but also because he's way faster when he's cloaked. It used to be that cloaking was almost counterproductive, but nowadays he's faster when he's cloaked, and he has Windstorm coming out of being cloaked. Even though that's been nerfed because it was just ridiculously strong, he's still in a much better place. Next up, we have my personal least favorite killer in the game, but a character that a lot of people really like, and I'm very happy for them. Just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's not for you, and that is the Hag. Now, the numbers don't lie on this one. The numbers do not lie. On release, it took Hag 6 seconds to set a trap. Think about that. Think about what I'm saying there. 6 seconds to stop and set up a trap. That animation was so slow. And if you were, well, actually, I'll get into the whole looping aspect of that now. But yeah, so nowadays it takes her 2 seconds to set a trap. Consider that. Think about that. 6 seconds originally, 2 seconds now. That is a massive buff. And what does it allow her to do? Well, it's kind of dual fold, right? Nowadays, she can set up a trap mid-chase, because the way it used to be was if you were chasing, or I guess if you were being chased by a Hag, and she stopped to set up a trap, if she actually committed to setting that trap, you could be halfway across the map, You could be halfway to China by the time that she was done setting that trap. It was crazy. It was such a bad situation for her. And, back then I felt bad for Hags. Now that she's so strong, I no longer feel bad for her. She's debatably S tier. Good for her. I'm happy for her because, I may not be a big fan of Hag, but you can't deny that it takes a lot of skill to play Hag. To play her well, that is. I guess anybody could technically click on her on the menu, but to play her well takes a lot. And I said it did 2 things with the buff, and then I got distracted because, rabbit trails are my thing, man. I always get off on another tangent, but that's because I operate on very loose scripts. But the other thing that she does really well now is the setup phase. So you think about it, and you add this up. Let's say she wants to set traps in the setup phase. That's what you should do as a Hag. You set up your little death zone, your spider web, and you go from there. Well, if it takes you 6 seconds every time, add up how much that's going to take. Okay, you set one trap, 6 seconds, another 12 seconds, another 18 seconds, another 24 seconds. Do you see what I'm saying? How each trap you take the time to set up, that's really setting you back because it takes 80 seconds for a solo survivor to hammer out a generator. So if it takes you roughly that long to put all of your traps up, what you could have is 2, 3, God forbid, 4 gens popping while you were setting up. And obviously, Hag used to be terrible, now she's very, very good. Another thing they did for her, kind of a nice quality of life thing, I wouldn't consider this a massive buff, but I think it's meaningful, is she can teleport to traps from up to 40 meters away, whereas when she was released, it was only 32. So Hag, oh gosh, the trap thing is a massive buff, and then the distance is also pretty big. So good for Hag. Again, just because somebody's not my cup of tea doesn't mean I'm not happy to see them brought up to being competitive. And Hag is definitely, I would say she's maybe the one that's made the most improvement from time of release, going from, I mean, at best, like a C tier killer to being, again, possibly S tier. Some people say she's easily S tier. I think she's high A, but that's just me. Good for Hag. Next up, we have Doctor, who was reworked in patch 3.5.0. And this is another one of those things where I feel like an old man, right? I feel like I'm telling new Dead by Daylight players who maybe have started playing the game in the last year or so, like, oh, you don't know how it was in my day. but when Doctor was released, and for years after, he had two modes. Those modes were Punishment and Treatment mode. In Punishment mode, all he could do was be a basic M1 killer. He could swing his weapon. In Treatment mode, he could use the Zap ability, the Static Blast. Not Static Blast, he has a... Static Blast is the big one. Shock Therapy, right, where he still has that, where he sends out that little almost rectangle of lightning that can increase your madness. And that was how Doctor operated. Doctor had Punishment and Treatment mode. And if you were in Treatment mode, you could not injure a survivor. And while it was admittedly kind of fun to switch between the two, just for the funny little animation where he pulls out the whooping stick, it was obviously not very viable. It was not a very good setup for him. And when they reworked him in 3.5, it was really a massive buff. Doctor climbed, I think, every tier list. I don't know anybody that was like, oh no, he's worse now. And one of the reasons for that was they added the ability Static Blast, which is what you get when on keyboard you hold control and he sends out the blast that goes throughout his entire terror radius. And Static Blast is very useful because what he used to have was called Static Field. And this is where, when he was in treatment mode, if you were within his terror radius, your madness would slowly rise. They took that out of the game, and admittedly, there were niche situations where Static Field could be alright, but its main problem was that it had to be in treatment mode. So you couldn't be injuring someone while you were doing that, so it's not like you'd be chasing someone around a loop and also raising the madness of their teammates, because, I mean, if you're chasing them in treatment mode, you're going to have to take the time to switch back to punishment mode, which was not instantaneous. It was just a lose-lose situation. So Doctor, much better than he used to be. Next, we have my golden boy, the cannibal, Bubba Sawyer. And again, this is one who, I feel like such a broken record. He went from being like an F-tier killer to being somewhere, you know, a lot of people have him B tier. I personally put him A tier. I think he's really underrated in just how lethal he is. He got a complete power rework in patch 3.1.0, which took him from being pretty bad to being pretty good. You know, I'm not going to throw the tiers out there again. Everybody can have their opinions on where he is on a tier list, but, you know, that, I guess that's kind of simple jargon, right? Pretty bad to pretty good. So the big thing that this one did was it extended his chainsaw sweep ability. So that's what it is when you hold him to, or whatever it is on a controller, and, you know, he revs up his chainsaw and he starts dashing forward with it. What happens is, previously, he had a set amount of time he would go. Now, they gave him tokens, and through the consummation of those tokens, he can add up to, 2 additional sets of sweeps. And because of that, he can play around pallets with his increased speed, with his guaranteed insta-down if he makes contact, and suddenly, he became a lot scarier. It's such a simple change, but by giving him the ability to do the chainsaw sweep for longer, he got a lot better. Now, admittedly, it's not all sunshine and rainbows with Bubba. He did lose the ability to permanently hold the chainsaw, like consistently rev it with the overheat mechanic. But you know, while I'm strongly opposed to it on Hillbilly, it actually makes a world of sense on Bubba, because what Bubba's generally would do is they would stand there and keep the chainsaw, you know, 80-90% revved and stand in front of a hooked survivor, and it just made, it was a face camping situation which nobody could ever beat it. I'm okay with this change. It's okay for Billy, and for Cannibal, and he still, again, he made a massive jump. So yeah, that was a really, really good add-on change for, not add-on change, I'm sorry, they did change his add-ons. Was it for the better or the worse? Ooh, probably for the worse. I think they hurt his add-ons. So again, it's not all good for Cannibal, but when you can go from being an F-tier killer in nearly every tier list to being A to B, that's a massive change, and the chainsaw sweep ability is finally one of the stronger ones in the game. Next to last, we have maybe the most controversial entry in this list, which is the Nightmare, who also got a rework. Almost everybody in this list got some kind of a rework, and his came in patch 3.1.0, which, I say there's controversy with it, right? Because there is. He went from his old power, wherein he was always in the dream world, and it took time to make a survivor fall asleep, and only when they were asleep could they see you, and only when they were asleep could they be hurt by you. That was when I was a Freddy main. That's when I really first started playing the game, was around that time, where he still had that power. And yeah, I don't know, man. I thought that was a really fun mechanic, but I also understand that against good teams, especially really good teams, he was completely outmatched and there was nothing he could do. So, yeah, I understand why they changed it. And when they did, he went from being certainly F tier. I mean, F tier amongst all F tier, right? To being a guy who, for a while there, I think he was A tier. He was really good. Now, it's fair to point out that he was brought back down by a series of nerfs in patch 4.7.0, which it was pretty harsh. They damaged a lot of what had made him so good. But the fact is, he could still teleport around generators. He could still place his snares around the map. He was a much, much better killer than he used to be. And maybe, just maybe, he was actually living up to the title of being a nightmare. Finally, we have my personal favorite killer, the Clown. He's my main, I love him, and I'm glad to say he's a lot better than he used to be. Is he good? No, I don't think he's I don't think he's necessarily good right now, but he's much better than he used to be, and that's all thanks to patch 4.5.0, which was the one where they added the antidote bottles that would speed the Clown up dramatically. You know, you might know him as the yellow bottles, right? The yellow mist he throws around. And look, I hear people say, but survivors can get in those as well. And, you know, honestly, most good clowns, they don't really give the survivors the opportunity to, unless there are times where I don't care if a survivor gets in it, especially if there's more than one survivor in the area. Like, go for it, knock yourself out, get in the yellow mist, play around, you know, that's no big deal. But it's so nice to have a little extra mobility. The only thing I would change about them is I would either give him more bottles, or I would make it to where he stays invigorated for longer, which is the status effect where he runs faster. Because Clown's mobility is still pretty bad, but I don't know, it was definitely a good change. But people always go back to the antidote bottles and they think that's what really makes Clown better than he used to be. That's not true. What makes him better than he used to be is that the thick cork stopper was made base kit. And if you don't play a lot of Clown, which I don't blame you, the basic mechanic of the thick cork stopper was that original Clown, he would take 5 seconds to reload his bottles, which always felt terrible because that's like eating a decisive strike, right? Well, if you ran the thick cork stopper, it would take 2 seconds off and make it to where you take 3 seconds, right? Basic math there. I don't know why I had to pause. It would take him 3 seconds to reload his bottles. The beauty of it is that was made base kit. Now, every time you run Clown, just imagine there's an invisible thick cork stopper that's being run with your kit, with whatever other 2 add-ons you have. In addition to that, you can still run the thick cork stopper, meaning it will take you 1 second to reload your bottles. That's awesome, because one of the big issues with Clown is bottle management, because he only has 5. He only starts with 5, and that's pretty rough. But he has been given mobility through the antidote, and he's been given better lethality in the chase through the base thick cork stopper. That was kind of hard to say fast. So if you upgrade his mobility and his lethality, I don't know how you could argue that he's not substantially better than he used to be. And that's why Clown is still generally going to be thought of as an F tier killer, but he's no longer in the conversation for the very worst in the game. He's clearly better than a few killers. And, you know, would I like to see him be a little stronger? Yeah, obviously. But that's really all I needed, was just a little more edge for the killer. So overall, I'm very happy with what they've done with Clown. And, you know, I don't feel like I can complain, because there are a lot of killers who have been made actively worse, which is a topic we will cover in the next video. But that's going to do it for today. I've been DustFood. Let me know down below, what has been the fate of your killer main, that is. Are they better than they used to be, worse than they used to be? Or are they kind of like, you know, spoiler alert, Nurse, who, you know, she's a bad example. I guess Nurse actually might be in the next video. I'm just now thinking about it, because I was just tossing out a strong killer, but ooh, I don't know. See, that's kind of spicy, right? There's a lot to go off of with this. There are a lot of killers who have actually been made worse. So is your killer better or worse than they used to be? I'm not throwing out an example because I don't want to commit to it, right? I told you, that's the problem of loose scripts. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do drop a like and subscribe if you had fun. And until next time, I've been DustFood. Bye, friends.